Okay, so we're gonna get started. So a few of you mentioned working with DBT or being interested, hearing about DBT. DBT is a transformation tool that operates on top of your database. So it's not running anything, it's not doing compute, but what it does is it helps organize and standardize your code so you're not worrying about writing like platform specific stored procedures to be able to run and do transformations. You can write everything in DBT, and then depending on where you point that code to, it will update itself based on that platform syntax. That is one thing I am using it for a lot right now, because we're switching databases a lot. So this has been a hugely helpful tool. I don't have a presentation today, so like slides, but I'm going to walk through some key points of the website, and then I'm going to get right into a demonstration of DBT itself. Any questions before I go? Great. Okay. Coalesce is going on in October. Go for a couple of days, you get a full DBT certification. There's a ton of trainings and stuff. I am considering going myself. Because DBT is such a new product, they just released their formal beta in December of 2021. Getting on board early on often allows you to kind of mold the product as an early adopter. So you can request features, you can present use cases, and that will, especially at the outset of a project like this, give you the opportunity to really engage with both the community and the platform build itself. So a couple of things I want to get into here. So first of all, the product itself, as I mentioned, it's for modeling, testing, and documentation. So the data modeling part we'll get into in the code. The testing is really interesting. So this allows you to create automated testing, which you can build directly as macros in the code that you're building. So for example, if you want to do a primary key test, you can make sure that it's unique and not null by running those tests that are built directly into the platform by calling them as a function. There's you can build your own tests. So if you want to do like a count test, you know that there's supposed to be this many records in any given table, or like a range validation test where you know one column is supposed to be 100%, so it can't go above, and you can validate as not greater than 1 and not less than 0. So there's all sorts of stuff that you can do in here for testing. I find that this is a differentiator because it's built directly into your transformation tool, as opposed to being a tool in and of itself that solely does automated testing. So I think this feature is great. And then there's data documentation. They have this really robust documentation capability that shows lineage. You can develop your own key definitions. It'll provide data types. And I'll show that a little bit when we get into the platform itself. The other thing, so I want to note two other things about DBT itself before we get into the code. There are free accounts available. So if you want to go play around with it, there's a 30-day trial that allows you to access Team, I believe, for 30 days. So that gives you all the features of Team. But if you want to just have an account that you get to continue to use and poke at when you have time, they do have this free developer account. And even if you're working on projects, if you find that you are the sole developer within your team, which often in data analytics we run into with smaller organizations, you as an organization may only need a single seat. So you want to do those pros and cons, but per organization, per client, um, and try to understand exactly who needs access. So the last thing I want to touch on before we get to DBT itself is the community. So the DBT community is really robust. They have a Slack channel. They have documentation. They are extremely responsive as a support team. And I've found that the Slack channel is extremely helpful, especially as I ramp up. I just started learning DBT a couple months ago, and the Slack channel was a great resource for me to go in and ask questions to other people who use it and get pretty quick responses. Or they have a feature where you can @help, and that will directly notify someone from support, but also have it on that Slack channel so that others can see the response. A lot of other people probably have the same question if you're running into it yourself. So this is a really nice thing about this tool, especially considering the tool is open source. Having that type of community can be extremely helpful. Okay, so we're gonna dive right into DBT. I'm gonna walk through quickly the architecture behind what we're actually gonna use as data. So we're using Microsoft Azure as the background platform, and I'm using Blob Storage to just store some CSVs. I'm importing those CSVs through ADF, so just going straight source to sink and dropping it into Snowflake. So here in Snowflake, we have staging tables, and that's where we're going to drive our DBT code on. Notice that we have both staging and curated schemas within the Snowflake environment. This allows us to pull in data that is a replica of the source, which allows you to do really great one-to-one validation. And then you can apply your transformations on it, and that goes in your curated section. And then you do different validations on your curated section because you've done some sort of transformations to them. This is widely known as ELTL, extract, load, transform, load, and is being adopted as a best practice across the industry. So finally, we'll get into DBT. Okay, so cool. So when you log into DBT, this is what your homepage looks like. You can go into different accounts. So if you, I know one of you mentioned that that you have a consulting firm. If you have different clients, you can create different accounts here and keep them completely separate from one another. You can also have different projects. So within an account, you can have multiple projects. Say you're building one data mart for analytics, another data mart for finance reconciliation, and another one to drive demographics to do some HR initiatives or something. You can split those up here. I've also used this projects feature to build out development, test, and production environments. So each project is either dev, test, or prod, and that allows me to easily migrate my GitHub data. So the code that's been pushed to GitHub, I can easily migrate over into one of these other projects and push out to the test environment, as opposed to trying to keep them all together. Trying to run a job into the test environment that's based on the development code. So if you change your development code, you don't have any kind of like backup or replication. That can get a little messy. So So this is a feature I use a lot. Okay, so one of the key features of DBT is the capability to connect both a source control repository and a database. So at Salt City Data Community, we have our own GitHub, so that's what I connected to. When you go to connect your GitHub, it asks you for a bunch of different things, and then gives you this output string that that is where the output of your model will go. So here we're doing in our data tool repo in our compare folder. You do have to do, it is a handshake between GitHub and DBT, so you will have to go and configure in GitHub itself to allow third-party applications and to confirm the DBT handshake, and then you'll be all set and you can commit directly from the DBT platform. And the other piece of this is the connection to your database. So this allows you to quickly and easily access any of the data that's in your database. Right now I'm connecting to my personal Snowflake account. So, you put in Snowflake, your account. They do give you an option to have a default role, which can be nice if you have complex role structures within your database, but you don't have to do it. And that's nice if if you are really stringent about setting default roles for different users and ensuring that their roles are really structured around their needs and use cases. It also allows you to do this thing, keep session alive. So Snowflake has this feature where it automatically shuts off any running data database, at the database level, after 4 hours of inactivity. So if you're inactive, it takes 4 hours, it'll shut off, which means that you save a lot on storage and compute. It's not running, so you don't have to do anything, or you don't have to pay more. What DBT can do, if you are running, a lot of scheduled jobs, what you can do is have the session keep alive. This will allow you to continue to run automated jobs without having failure because your database has turned itself off. So yeah, that is how you connect your database. And then the final piece of setup is connecting your credentials. So, so you have an individual profile within your team and your project. These profiles allow you to create not just, so it's operating within the dev environment, but it also deploys a personal schema. So you can be testing in your own branch from GitHub and actually run it into the database and not have to worry about overwriting someone else's data, accidentally writing into test or into the main branch. You just, you write into your own schema. So, so credentials. So you put your credentials in. This asks for your personal credentials, and then this is an automated connection. So when you do go to deploy, you will have additional credentials that you'll need to put in. This also has a pretty robust API. I am currently using it for a client to trigger the deployment of, or not deployment, but trigger the pipeline run of DBT after the pipeline run in Azure Data Factory is completed. So, I have data running into staging tables from ADF to Snowflake. The moment those Snowflake staging tables are loaded, ADF tells DBT to start running. There are a lot of other features and functionality in it, but right now that's how I'm using it. Okay. So a couple other features that are within the administrative GUI. You can create different environments and environment variables. So you can add variables that are specific to your environment, to your pipeline runs, however you want to set that up. And then you have different environments for deployment and development. So this is my development environment. It's pretty straightforward. And same thing with deploy. So the difference that you see here in deploy is that I've identified a job for it. So, so we can go into our jobs. I haven't run this yet, but what this does is by using this dbt run code, I can set it on a schedule or through the API, and anytime this job is triggered, it will run. So very, the exact same thing as any other type of scheduled or automated job, just done here in the GUI. Okay, so that is everything I want to talk about on the front end. Any questions before I get into the development itself? Have I lost everybody? Okay,
Not lost.
Okay, great.
Following along.
Great. Okay. So once you have your environment completely set up, any jobs you want run, set up, you can do that all before you start developing. And then when you go into development, so the way that you get here is in your left menu, the same as anything else, but you go to this develop code. It does take a little while to load, so I preloaded it here. But what will happen is you'll be brought into this console. The first thing you'll see in this green bar is not commit, but it will say initialize project, and that will build your folder structure for you and prep for your initial commit. The folder structure here exists as, we have some other stuff in our repo here, but it exists as this analysis, logs, macros, models, seeds, snapshots, target, tests, and my YAML, and then your project YAML. So there are two areas to do schema configuration directly, or not schema configuration, to do configuration of your platform directly. And then there are things that you can do either within the models or within the macros themselves. So there are two configuration files. One is this dbt project YAML, and this just walks you through the basics of setting up a configuration. You can also do things like, there are a lot of add-ons. You can do like bars, UTC. So you can identify your base time zone, and that will that'll make sure that everything starts at UTC. It also allows you to convert time zones a little bit easier, because you have that base time zone identified. You can then, even using a column of listed time zones attached to different locations, you can convert your time zones to local time. You don't have to necessarily specify like East Coast or LA, however you want to do it. So that's our project overall configuration. So that's our overall configuration. What I'll go into next is some of the models. And then after I give you kind of the context of how those models work together, I'll show you the schema building and some documentation stuff. Okay, so when you initialize your project, you only end up with this models folder. There isn't like hierarchy underneath it. What I have kind of set up as my preferred hierarchy is a staging, a building, and a deploy layer for each. And this allows you to break your transformations up into more consumable and more easily like reviewed and debugged code snippets. So like here, I have the initial source data coming into DBT. So similar to our staging tables in Snowflake, this is a direct copy of what exists in the staging model. So here, here we get our data. I forgot to mention the data set that I'm working with is in food recommendations, which is a really interesting data set that I found on Kaggle. Kaggle is this really great data community website that does, has free data sets. It does like competitions. There's a bunch of stuff on there. Okay, so we can, control enter, run our query, and this is what we come up with as a result. So we can see the different scores. We have the review ID, and that gives us, a bunch of different functions here, and then gives us, this is how many stars on average this is associated to. So it gives you kind of a bell curve of what that star rating is. So we can do different things here. Like we could say, join service. And that will save this alias so that when you go to your next point in the model, you will use that alias of the column instead of the column name itself from the source. This is obviously in real world examples, this is a little bit more useful. For example, source data sets, they have a lot of things like the column name is the table name underscore column name, and you don't necessarily want that when you're pushing out to end users. So you may truncate that to just the column name, or you might make it a little bit easier. I run across in a lot of databases the use of GST instead of tax amount as a column name. End users aren't going to know what GST is. They will know what the tax amount is, though. So just making it a little bit more readable right from the outset of bringing into DBT. So same thing here. We have data coming in from the restaurants. And then we go to our build layer. So this is within this build folder here. It's the only one in here, but imagine you have a larger data set. You bring in maybe 15 tables as your source and support tables, and you only want to output one fact in a couple dimensions. So you're using those 15 tables in source to, in build, create those fact and dimension tables that is a much smaller output than what you're inputting in the source. So here, a couple things to note. Here we have our in model configuration. So in my computer's frozen, but in this dbt project.yaml in our configuration file, you can identify how your models materialize. So they use ephemeral for essentially ghost tables. You know, these are subqueries that are going to build your queries later on. So you can do that. There are things called post hook and pre-hook, which are non-select SQL statements that can be run against your database. So you can have a pre-hook here. Say you want to do auditing. You can have a pre-hook that goes through. It creates you know, a timestamp for the start of your pipeline run. It indicates the pipeline that you're running, the tables that are included, and then you can have a post hook that that makes a timestamp for when the pipeline completed, if there was an error, you know, different auditing metrics, and that you can run from here as a macro. I'm going to exit pages. Just give me a moment to refresh here. Okay. Okay, and we're back. Okay, so in the food Rex build, we're bringing our source tables together to build this single fact table that we're going to output. So here we're making an ephemeral table. We don't want this to actually output into our database. We just want it to build within dbt itself to work towards creating that output. So we have with statements bringing in our other sources. This ref is a function that's built directly into dbt that allows you to create inherent connections between any of the models themselves. So the models don't have an inherent structure. You have to build it into the code itself. And then we have the data. So, you know, basic SQL coding. We want to let join. We're making sure to use the table names before our column names to make sure that we're not getting any duplicates anywhere or ambiguous column names. And here you can do other stuff like, say we want to do, instead of seeing for a single restaurant, we can do like, we want to do the sum of this everything as so yeah, so you can do different stuff like this. I use the this layer to do all of my transformations. So any aggregation that you're doing, any date changing. So if you want to, you know, maybe your database is coming in as Unix, you can use the from Unix time to convert it into like a timestamp, and then you can use you know, a convert time zone to change it from UTC to your local time, or to change it so that all of your times which in the database are local to that facility can be standardized. There's some other date functions. There are different packages available for DBT. So you can, similarly to like Python or R, you can structure packages into this that will allow you to use different functions because it's open source. There's a lot of them built, but unless they are certified by DBT itself, you may just want to do some code checking to make sure that it feels like it would run well, and maybe do some extra validating of that data after you do the transformation just to make sure the function works. Pros and cons of open source. Okay, so some of the features within the coding environment itself. First of all, we have some lineage available. So you're able to see what is being referenced, what it's building into, and what it's outputting to. So you can see the entire lineage of the data as it comes into DBT and it moves out of DBT. You can also compile your SQL. So depending on the database that you're connected to, this compiling will look different. So because we're in Snowflake, this will be specific to the Snowflake syntax. However, I could replace the database connection that I built with a SQL Server connection, and instead of Snowflake, this compiling would take this code and convert it into SQL Server syntax. So that's one of the features I really like. I'm a proponent for agnostic solution building. You shouldn't be stuck to an environment just because it's what you picked out 5 years ago. So it allows for easy migration. And then we have our queries, and I don't know how big this query is. We will see. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to run. And like anything else, you need to debug. So find and replace is really functional. Tools it's not, most tools it is, but it's a handy feature that if it doesn't work, it's annoying. Cool. So then we can move on to our final output layer. So this I have built into the deploy folder, and this is always really simple. My preference is to have the output model be as clean as possible. You may want to do a couple of, last minute aliases and some different configurations. But keeping this simple allows you to walk through the layers and debug pretty quickly. There are some errors that you'll only receive here because it's writing into your database and having an error there. So if it notifies you that an error is at this level, it can only be because of that connection, not necessarily because of the code you're writing. And then finally here, we change our configuration from ephemeral to table, and this will actually write a table into your schema. So were I to run this that data would write directly into this curated section here. You don't have to have your tables built. You don't have to have any schema actually built out. It will all build itself out from here. And you can drop the table as many times as you want. Say you want to add columns here, remove columns there. If you update the schema in here and drop the table in Snowflake, it'll just rebuild the new structure of that table directly in Snowflake or your chosen database. Okay, the final piece I want to run through is documentation. So I had mentioned earlier that we have this schema YAML. So this is a configuration that allows you to build documentation into your solution. Here I've just made a quick example. So we have a table we have a model called REST source. because this is source, it brings data directly from Snowflake staging. Transformations are limited to aliases, date time, and addition of site keys. So if you want to not use the natural keys from the application, you want to build, surrogate keys, you can do that. And I prefer to do that at this layer. And then you list out your columns. So one of our columns is ID. We can give a description of that. And then let me pull in to make sure I have the right syntax. But here is where you would indicate your automated tests. So whether you build your own tests here in the tests, or you use their built-in tests, you would put the tests themselves in this configuration and they would know to run. So here we can run, this is specific for this column, we can run a unique and a not null test, and that will throw an error if this ID is duplicated across it, that you're double counting somewhere. Yeah, so you can write tests and they're super handy in debugging. So then what we can do is we can generate our documentation. What this will do is compile all the documentation that we've built already, see any of the lineage that's there, look at data types, and then we can view our documentation. So this is behind the firewall. So so you will need to have users if you want additional people to be able to see this documentation. So say you have a team of developers, you have 5 development users for that, but you need an additional user because you have an analyst who needs to know the definitions and structure of your database. They would need to have a user as well. So you'd need 6 user licenses. This allows you to do a bunch of stuff. So we can go in here. We built documentation for this. So did we? Yeah, we built documentation for restaurant. So here you can see the documentation that we put in. Then identification of, the column. We can see the description here. And then you can see the models it's associated to or referenced by. So, so REST source is referenced by food rex build. If you click on that, that'll go to that documentation. And then here, so there's a number of things. You can see the code, you can see the compiled, and then you can see the lineage. So you can get a quick view of the lineage here, or we can go into the bigger lineage and see where we are. This maroon will always tell you which piece of documentation you're in, and the blue will always be what that documentation is associated to. Okay, I think that might be everything I have for you. So does anyone have any questions? Mary, I didn't see you had joined. Okay, no questions on DBT. Questions about anything else or recommendations on what we should do next? Okay. Well, upcoming events, we have we're taking a little bit of a break, so we're coming back in September, the week after Labor Day, so it'll be Tuesday the 13th, I believe. We're going to be doing an Azure platform demonstration. So we did ADF a couple of weeks ago. If you're interested in seeing that, it's on our YouTube channel. And then when we come back, we're going to dive really deep into the Azure platform as a whole. So getting into DevOps, billing, security, all the administrative structure behind that. And then we'll have 2 more demo sessions after that. And then that'll be the end of our demo arc. So we'll be looking for new topics. If you're interested in requesting a type of arc that you'd like to see, whether it's more trainings, specific on a particular tool, specific speaker sessions you'd like to see, please feel free to reach out. I hope you liked this session and decide to come back. If you're interested, our YouTube channel, Ashley put in the chat earlier, please subscribe, connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to grow the community.
Just a quick question on the SQL. Is that like, did you have to adjust? I assume it's a flavor of ANSI SQL in DBT.
Yes, it is. And they have some idiosyncrasies with it, just because of the underlying functionality of being able to switch between different syntaxes. So, for example, I was talking about convert time zone so much because I have been dealing with a time zone issue for about 3 weeks. They do not use convert time zone the way that Snowflake does. You have to use a variable in order for it to recognize a column as a time zone. And so there's just small idiosyncrasies like that where where you may run into an issue that you wouldn't run into with natural SQL.
Yeah, and so that's in my own shop. The DBA before me did everything in SSIS, which is fine, but the rest of the team didn't have any need or prior experience in SSIS.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he had developed was a black box to the rest of the team, which was fine as long as he was there. But when he left, then their ability to support it or understand it was lacking.
Right.
And so I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this idea of a new tool that generates the SQL to do transformation. And is it addition by addition or subtraction by addition? I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm dealing with this myself right now. I'm working with a client to stand up their entire their first data mart. So building out all of this infrastructure, but as a consultant, eventually I will leave, and it's kind of a line that you have to walk between making sure that the structure is what it needs to be to scale and ensuring that the person who will be taking over, which in this case is an analyst and not used to architecture support, will be able to maintain that structure going forward. So I think this tool does a good job of being comprehensive while also trying to stick to some basics of SQL so that a beginner can come in and work through it. I will say that if you're worried about that, I would go with ADF. which is point and click mostly. You can add some customization and SQL functionality in it, but ultimately it requires not necessarily an engineer or an architect. An analyst can support that infrastructure through ADF and not have much onboarding necessary.
Yeah, I've played around with ADF. I've done a couple processes in it. And I've had previously heard of DB2, and it's been kind of on my thought horizon of maybe I should take a look at that as a transformation tool. So I don't know, the jury's still out, but like with this demo, like the folders that you had, is there an implied order to the folder, or is the order really based on the specific code that you write in defining like this model table is being derived from staging folder?
It's really based on the code that you write. I build that structure because it intuitively makes sense to me.
Okay.
But if there's another way that makes sense to you, the only requirement for this structure that they develop is that you put your models in your model folder and you put your macros in your macro folder and your tests in your test folder. You can structure the hierarchies underneath those major folders any way you want.
Yeah. And I assume that the SQL can read like JSON files and all of that. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there's like from JSON, you can I think connect directly to blobs that are holding JSON. I haven't done that yet, so I'm not entirely certain how that works, but I think you can.
REST API, I think I saw that in your code.
Yes, they have a REST API available. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff you can do in it. Just another plug for ADF. It does fully integrate SSIS packages. So if you have, these old SSIS packages that you want to, you don't have functionality
No.
with because you don't have a resource, they upload directly into ADF.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Well, if you want to learn more, we did do an ADF session 2 weeks ago, so go and look at it on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, thank you everyone so much. We hope to see you after the break and have a great night.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.